couple of weeks ago, Canon sent me a few RF f4 lenses to help with making a video that I wanted to make. Now, you'll be able to see that video tomorrow, but I want to talk today about one of the issues I faced when I had the lenses, which is bad weather. I didn't have good weather the whole time I had the lenses. A real shame, but we're going to change that when we come to editing. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring a brand new fresh photography tutorial. This week we're diving back into the world of editing. I promise next week we'll do something non-editing, but I wanted to do something very specific because, as I say, I had these Canon RF f4 lenses. I was making a video about how f4 lenses compare to f2.8 lenses and what you can do with f4 lenses and all that kind of stuff. But I had an issue. While I had the lenses, the weather was really not that good. It was very grey and not that kind of interesting grey. It was very kind of uniform, white, light grey sky, no sunsets to speak of, nothing like that. So I went out, I took photos, I did what I could with them. I knew what I was going to talk about anyway, and I already had photos that I was going to use, examples and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't the end of the world, but it does present an interesting problem. What do you do when the weather is like that? What do you do when there isn't interesting weather to kind of spice up your landscape photos? Or in this case, it's kind of a portrait, kind of an environmental, adventure-y kind of photo. Well, we're going to dive in. We're going to do a bit of Lightroom and a bit of Photoshop. We're going to work out how we can spice up our photos. And what's interesting about this is I think it makes you a better photographer in the long run. Editing like this, I actually love it anyway. But we've spoken in the past before about how I think editing a photo and trying to bring it to where you wanted it to be in the first place can be a very good technique to learning what to look out for your photos, and therefore, in the end, how to take a better photo. Let's dive in. So we're going to use this photo here. Now, I don't think this is a terrible photo, but as you can see, the lighting is not particularly interesting. I was actually up on the South Downs. This isn't someone that I know. This is just a random photo that I took, kind of almost like a street photo, I suppose. I saw them walking. I thought this will make a good sort of scene, walking through the grass and the meadows and stuff like that, with the hills in the background and the sky. But as I took it, I knew this is not what I want the photo to look like. But if I get the photo, I can probably make something from it in post. Now, this was shot on a 7200, so we've got a nice bit of lens compression. So I like the feel, but we're going to change a bunch of stuff. Let's start with where I would always start in a situation like this. This photo to me wants to be 16:9. And that is basically because it is very obviously a wide photo. He is walking into the frame. I'm actually going to crop it a little bit like this as well, just to sort of put him on that rule of thirds like so. Let's click done there. I think that's probably a better photo. I might just move that over a little bit. Something like that I think is fine. Now, we're going to do a very basic edit in Lightroom, nothing major, because we're going to go into Photoshop, which is where most of the magic is going to happen. But the first thing to note, if you look at our subject here, you can see he's got highlights down on his right side. That's great because it gives the look of kind of directional light. Now, of course, the light here is very flat. There's not much kind of natural contrast, not much in the way of shadows and highlights, but it's very interesting that we've got this kind of natural highlight down his right side. And we can work with that in terms of making it into maybe a bit more of a sunset photo, maybe a bit more of an interesting photo. We'll come back to that. Let's do a very basic edit here, a bit of contrast, maybe not too much, maybe boost the shadows a touch. Again, not too much, bit of clarity, maybe a bit of texture. I'm going to leave pretty much everything else as is because we're going to do most of this in Photoshop today. So what we can do, and if you've got the Creative Cloud subscription, you can just go straight ahead, right click on the photo here, edit in, and then Adobe Photoshop 2022. And we're going to be using the latest version as of recording this video. So Adobe Photoshop 2022, we've got lots of nice things we can do there. Easy to replace the sky, easy to edit the photo in lots of different fun ways. So let's go ahead and do that. Now we are going to load up the photo here. There we go. I'm going to unlock it. And the first thing I'm going to do is press Control J just to duplicate that layer. That's going to allow us to make any changes. And we've also got this backup layer here, which will always be there. So we can always go back to the original unedited photo very easily. Now, the first thing I want to do, come up here, edit. Let's come down to sky replacement. This is the very first change we're going to make because this is going to be based around kind of what we do with the rest of the photo. Now, there's a couple of options here. If you've not seen our videos on sky replacement in Photoshop, it is so easy now. It is unbelievably easy to do this. As you saw, I just clicked sky replacement and Photoshop did everything and worked out where the sky was. It masked it out, including all these difficult areas with these kind of hills and different bits popping up there. But you can see it did a really good job of masking that out. So we can go ahead then and just select which sky we'd like on this pop-up menu that kind of comes up when we do this. So let's go ahead and click this arrow. Now we're going to use a sunset sky because that's the ultimate vibe of the photo I want to go for in the end. So let's click Sunsets Pack 1. Let's look at these and let's find one that we think is going to work. Now I quite like the look of this one. Let's see what this looks like. That does look really nice. It might be a little bit on the nose with the sun right there. What about this one? I really like the look of this one. That's quite nice as well. It might be a little bit too light. You know what? Let's go with it. Let's see what we can do. So what I can do here is actually change the color temperature of the sky. I might just warm that a touch. I can do a lighting adjustment and color adjustment, which Photoshop will apply to the foreground. You saw it just do it there to try and match it with the sky. I think that's fine. I'm going to click OK there. I think we've done a kind of decent job of popping the sky in. And you know what? It already doesn't look that out of place, which is a great start because sometimes you do this and it just doesn't look good and you have to do a lot of work to make it work. But there's obviously a lot that we need to do here still. Now, as you can see, Photoshop has created this sky replacement group where it's added in all these bits. Let's just close that up now so we just keep it nice and neat for the time being. Let's come down here to an adjustment layer. Now, what we're going to do is make a curves adjustment layer, and I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast. But by having this, let's do it like this. By having this above everything else, we are now affecting the whole photo. So the sky and the foreground, which is really useful because it kind of marries everything together. Everything's being affected at once. Now, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and bring in a hue saturation layer. I'm actually going to bring this one down beneath the sky replacement group. I've just put it in the group actually, so I'll press Ctrl Z. Let's bring it beneath the sky replacement group, and I'm just going to bring that saturation down a little bit. There we go. See, if I turn that off and back on, you can see that's making quite a difference. But we're just getting rid of those greens that are really popping through and some of the colors that we don't necessarily want. We want to bring this into a more of a sunset feel. Great. Another adjustment layer. Let's go color lookup this time. Now we can essentially apply a filter, a little bit like an Instagram filter or a filter to this photo, and we can apply a look to it. So that's what we're going to do. Now we're going to go for, let's go for crisp warm. That's going to affect the whole photo again. And as you can see, as I put that on, it's way too over the top. So let's bring that opacity down to something maybe around 30%. Let's turn it off, turn it back on. I think it's looking pretty good. And we're going to go ahead and do one more of those, another color lookup. This time we're going to go for, let's go edgy amber. Now again, look at that, it's way too over the top. It's way too saturated. And I mean, that is crazy. But that's 100% opacity. So let's bring that opacity down to something like even 15%. Now, if I turn that off and turn that back on, we are really starting to get towards what looks more like a sunset. Now we can see where we started here by holding Alt and clicking on the eye symbol for the bottom layer. This is what it did look like completely without any of these bits we've been doing to it. Hold Alt and click the eye again. You turn everything else back on. So this is what it looks like now. So before and after, we're doing a lot to this photo. We're doing a huge amount. Let's go ahead and add some more though. Let's do some more things. Now let's go ahead and add an exposure layer. Now, I think the foreground is maybe a little bit too bright. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring this down beneath the sky replacement group. And I'm going to bring the exposure down. Not too much, but a little bit. There we go. I think that's quite good. Turn that off, turn that back on. I think that looks sort of decent. Let's go ahead and get a curves layer in here as well. And I'm actually going to drag the black point here over to the right, which is going to darken everything. But what I'm going to do is actually select this layer mask, which at the moment is all white, which means everything is revealed. I'm going to press Ctrl I. That's going to turn it all black, which means everything is hidden. Let's go ahead and get a paintbrush, and we're going to use white to actually paint on areas to reveal this curves adjustment. So We can do that by actually painting white here. I've got black selected, so just press X to switch that over to white. A nice sort of big soft brush with a low flow. I'm going to go about 20%. Now, flow allows us to build up how we paint this on. We don't paint it kind of full opacity, if you like. You can build it up as you paint over. And we're actually going to darken some of this hill over here because it would be a little bit darker. So let's do a bit of this. If the sun's coming in from the right here, which of course in our photo it now is. Let's darken some of this foreground a little bit as well. There we go. I quite like that. But we can also do something with our subject here. Let's go ahead and make a new curves adjustment. Let's bring that white point over a little bit and the black point up just a touch as well. Now we're going to do the same thing, Control I to turn that layer mask all black. And with the nice soft paintbrush, I'm just going to paint onto our subject here just to brighten them a touch. Nothing too crazy, but just to make them pop a little bit from the image. Let's turn that off and back on. So you can see we've just brightened them just enough. Now what I'm going to do next is actually deselect any layer. I'm going to press Control, Shift, Alt, E. That's going to actually merge everything together and create a new layer, which is essentially a flattened image of everything else we've done so far. So we've now got just one layer, which is this image thus far. Let's go ahead and click Filter. Let's go down to Neural Filters. Now, what I'd like to do here is actually increase, or I suppose decrease, the depth of field. So have a nice shallow depth of field. Obviously we've shot with f4 and I probably wouldn't have minded the depth of field here. I quite like it if we weren't already doing so much to the image. But since we're doing so much kind of photo manipulation here, we may as well go in and change the depth of field a little bit. And it's so easy on Photoshop now. So we can just go ahead and open these neural filters and we come down here to depth blur. Let's turn that on. We did a whole video about this. And let's make sure we click focus subject here. This little checkbox, that's going to make sure that our subject here is kept in focus. He's the focal point, and it's going to kind of work out how to blur the rest of the photo, which is great. So look at that. It's already done it straight away there. We can adjust the strength. We can adjust different things like haze, but you can see it does such a good job of blurring not only the background, but you see this foreground kind of naturally blurs and then becomes in focus when it comes to our subject here and then starts blurring out again. It's a really clever way of doing things. Let's up the blur strength to, let's go to 60 and let's even add a bit of haze in as well. See what that looks like. Let's go for 15 with haze and see just what that looks like. There we go. I quite like that. I quite like that. Okay. I think that looks really good. Let's go ahead and just click OK. It's going to put it onto a new layer so we can see what's going on here. If I turn that off, look at that. Look at that. That's absolutely amazing. Even the foreground there, look at that, it's perfect. Right, now what we might want to do, you might have noticed if you're eagle-eyed, some of his hair, I think, has been slightly affected by the blur, which is not what we want to happen. Yeah, look at that. So we just need to go in with a layer mask. So we can do that by just selecting that layer, clicking this little button down here to add a layer mask. And we're going to just paint with black around him a little bit to actually just reveal some of the areas that we feel should be left untouched. Now, we're in a bit of a good situation here because in quite a good way, we can actually be pretty liberal with how we paint this on because of the fact that the background is actually blurred in the shot. Already, it's just not as blurred. But it doesn't matter too much if we go over the edges here. You see if I've gone over the edge there, it's kind of left a little bit, maybe not ideal. We'll come back to that in a second. But for the most part, it's going to be quite forgiving because of that naturally blurred background in the shot. Let's get a little bit of his hair in here, just to make this a little bit more natural. There we go. Let's come back down to this hand, which is where the main problem lies. Now we're using black here, so we want to switch to white, which we can do by just pressing X on the keyboard. And I'm just going to fill this in. There we go. Just going to fill this in like so. Let's Let's just bring back his fingers. I pressed X there to switch to black again. And then back to white just to fill in these bits that need sorting. There we go. And I think zoomed out, I think that looks pretty good. So if I turn this off and back on, you can see it's affected the whole photo. Now, what I like about doing this, we've done this in the correct order, right? So the order that we do these things is important because now the sky is blurred as well. Whereas if we'd done sky replacement after doing the depth blur, the sky would not be blurred. So you'd have a blurred background, then the sky would be in focus. It'd be all very strange, not ideal. Right, I think this looks good. There's two more things I might do. Let's go ahead and do another color lookup. Let's load in, we can try two things. We could try late sunset. Now that looks crazy. But if we bring that opacity right down, does it look good? It looks okay. I don't mind that actually, it looks pretty good. But let's change it to something like soft warming. We could bring the opacity up. I don't think it's too bad, but let's try teal orange plus contrast. I always really like that one, but I think it might give the wrong color for what we're going for here. So instead, I'm going to come up here to full colors, see what that looks like. It looks okay, but I think we might want to go for not bleach bypass, although that is quite a good look. Let's go candlelight. Now it's going to be a reasonably subtle effect, but it does add a little something. And lastly, I want to add a curves adjustment again. This will be kind of a final curves adjustment where I'm just going to add a point here in the shadows, bring that down a bit. A point up here to bring up some of the highlights and the midtones. And then I just want to bring up that black point, just a touch there. Because essentially what that's going to do is give us a nice sort of faded look. If I turn this off, turn this back on, I quite like that as a kind of final part to this, right? So just really kind of bringing everything together. Now, if we go back to the original photo, let's hold Alt and left click here. This is where we started, right? Pretty, to be honest, boring, flat photo. If I hold Alt again, left click, and this is where we've got to. I think that looks pretty decent, to be honest. I'm pretty happy with that. And, you know, again, I really, even now, you know, I do this sort of thing a lot, obviously, but I learn a lot every time I do it, you know, to look at, for example, in this case, the light on his right side, even though the light was very flat in our original photo, the highlight is on his right side. So we need to kind of make it feel like the sun is over there shining onto him. And that's an interesting thing to then pick up and then think about when you're then taking photos. And when you can get out and it is a nice sunset, you can actually go ahead and look for that kind of thing. And, you know, composition wise, I'm still very happy with how this photo turned out. I think it's a nice bit of rule of thirds. It works nice as a 16:9, which I always really like. But, you know, it's interesting to try and push the photo to where you wish it had been, because then you learn a little bit about what you want to look for in a photo. Now, because we're done here, we can just press Control S, which is going to save the photo. And again, if you're part of the Adobe plan, the actual subscription, we can just close that back to Lightroom and the photo is just here in Lightroom. Here's another version that I actually already did of this photo, a little bit more maybe intense. I actually think I might prefer the new one, but there we go. Yeah, it looks a bit more natural. Now, of course, back in Lightroom, we can still do a few different things. We could come to masking here. We could go ahead and do a radial gradient, just draw that out, maybe pop that over him a little bit, up that exposure just to brighten him a touch, quite like that. Let's go a new mask. Let's do another radial gradient, maybe a bit bigger this time. Let's go ahead and click these three dots here, invert, and then bring that exposure down a little bit. I think that looks quite nice. We could always bring the overall exposure up if we wanted to, and bring the shadows down maybe even the highlights down a little bit. So this is how it came out of Photoshop, and this is where we took it to. Maybe that light on him is too much, but it's something we could play around with. And I like this kind of back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop. I think it works really well. Now, I'd love to know what you'd like to see in the next Tutorial Tuesday. Would you like to see a practical tutorial where we talk about how to do one specific type of photography? Would you like to see another many possibilities of? So we did the many possibilities 85mm. We've done the many possibilities of 24-70. I feel a 50mm on the cards. I'd love to hear your thoughts about all of that stuff down in the comments, so let me know. Of course, if you want to see the kit used for this photo, for all this stuff, even this video, it's all down in the description, so you can go and check that out for yourself as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. That always helps me out a huge amount. I really appreciate it. Of course, I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.